Hi, welcome to the second part of our discussion, which is the international business environment concerning political and legal environment. In the previous discussion, we have identified the political system affects greatly the economic activities of a particular country. So the form of political system that the country has will give us an idea on what type of economic system that the country has. And it will also follows that the legal system will eventually adjust with the type of political system that the country is currently experiencing. So let's first try to refresh ourselves about the different economic systems. So in economics, there are three ways of us identifying the different systems. The first one we call on is the market economy. Now, under market economy, we let the business enterprises decide on its own of what products to produce, how many products to produce, and how it will be distributed among the different groups of people who will need the different products. So we let actually the market describe itself on how it will actually interact based on the basic fundamental laws of economics. On the other hand, we do have a command economy wherein it is the national government who controlled almost everything in terms of the lives of the people of those living in that particular country. So deciding on what products to produce, how we need to produce, how to distribute, what jobs should people to prioritize, this is actually best reflected under command economy. But in general, now we need to understand that in most situations, the most common setup that we have right now in the world is a mixed economy, wherein certain situations there will be safeguards where there's a combination of concept of market and command economy in most situations. So let's have some highlights of example of events which had happened over the last 20 years. For example, in the United States of America, when there were a problem before with one of their major financial institutions, which is the American Insurance Group or the AIG, the national government took over, the federal government rather took over the company to ensure that it would not affect all other financial institutions in the country, with the assumption that eventually the government would be selling and let the private sector eventually take over the reins of this particular business endeavor. So there were safeguards or laws that may be introduced in the legal system that will try to ensure that limits the possible abuses that we will expect as a result of prioritizing too much freedom in a market economy. That is when we call now it is a mixed economy. On the other hand, we have already the cases of China, wherein their political system is basically totalitarianism in nature, wherein there are no political freedoms, restricted in most aspects of life of the people. However, in terms of economic activities, there has been a gradual opening up of letting people decide of what they wanted to do. So therefore, that became now as a mixed economy as a result. And more or less a limited ownership is now being allowed in China in over the recent years. So that's the reason why we're saying that in general, most countries around the world are not really pure market or not pure command, but generally the mixed economy is being used around the world itself. Aside from economic system, the next major issue that normally adjusted to the type of political system a country has is about the legal systems. Now, in the legal systems, we need to understand that this affects the type of operation system multinational has in a particular country. Now, the legal system, by the way, describes what is the issue on regulation of the behavior of the people, the enforcement of laws, and how to reduce and redress the grievances of the people. Now, there are several factors that multinational enterprises and government needs to work as part of the relationship. Now, the first main issue, of course, is the relationship of this MNE with the host government. So in this case, from the example that we had given from the previous session, what is the type of relationship of American companies with the Philippine government since they are currently operating in the Philippines? Second, since they are American companies, what type of concerns that they had to still perform in spite of the fact that their operations are in the Philippines and yet they still need to comply with the legal systems of their mother country, which in this case, the United States of America. Now, as a result, there are possibilities of realignment in terms of relationship among members of the government of the host country and the different members of the different business operators who are present in the host country. So it's about trying to actually to request for certain prioritization in terms of benefits, since they would like to operate at a good level in such a way that they can actually roll out and increase their operations if there were incentives provided for this particular organizations. Now, that's the reason why certain governments in some countries are providing incentives for multinational enterprise to actually come and relocate to their respective countries so that they can actually increase the level of economic activity, provide better opportunities for their people. On the other hand, the company receives tax incentives and holidays for how long it is something which is normally defined either through a national law or or in this case, we do have what we call a or city or provincial city ordinances or provincial laws that are enacted. So it may actually vary depending on if there are separate guidelines that will be needed. But of course, on both ends, for the side of the multinational enterprise, there are political risks that they had to undergo. Considering the dynamics of political system in any particular country, that may have an impact or effect whenever there will be changes in leadership, or if there will be a continuous leadership, but the direction of the existing prioritization of the existing government leaders changes over a period of time, that will be a risk that should be considered by multinational level organization. And of course, if the operation of these companies is quite big, not only in the particular country but in the region, but there's a need also to balance the types of the decision making in terms of what products to produce so that they can actually maximize now their production capability depending on which resources are available from one country versus the other. So this is basically just a start of already of the issues in terms of globalization processes we have them right now. And of course, if there will be concerns or issue like factions which we are organized by regional political processes, like in this case, if you want to do business in the European Union, these are several countries, but nonetheless, as a whole, they had basic one policy as European Union, but of course there are the policies on the different member nations as we know them. Or in this case, there might be a trading concern as a bloc presented by the members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, but still each country has their unique policies or guidelines in terms of certain businesses that may or may not be acceptable, as we have learned when we discussed cultural environment in the previous sessions. Okay, so all in all, there will be an interrelationship with the different factors that will actually affect the decision of multinational enterprises on how to prioritize the extent of their entering the new markets in these new countries or territories they are interested, considering there's an increase. So one classic example is that a lot of companies had become very, very much interested in spite of the fact of the different challenges that they are encountering if they want to enter the mainland China market, considering the number of population there, their behavior for consumption. That's a plus consideration why they wanted to enter, and yet there are several issues, and most of them I'll be discussing now in terms of the legal issues, which is a risk being considered by most organizations as a result. Now, how do we manage these different political risks? So there are different strategies we can actually use. Now, the first one is that we minimize the outright investments. We select what is the most appropriate strategy to enter the particular country that we can minimize our investment. So we will be discussing in the next 2 to 3 meetings in relation to how do we select appropriate entry strategies for this particular countries. And then of course the second one is that there are treaties that are being signed for mutual investment. That is practically between two different to represent some multinational organization that's being represented by their home country and also the host country. That is one possible aspects that we see right now. No? But of course, in the start, it's just basically just deciding how to enter into. But nowadays, it's been a very, very common practice. And then third, we identify reciprocal settings where investment from host country can be seized in case of expropriation. So there will be problems. We need to know what are the possibilities that the extent of business operation will be taken over. So like if you talk about in the Philippines, foreign investors should be clarified which type of businesses wherein foreign ownership is not allowed. So we always encounter in the news concerns about media ownership, ownership of institutional or educational companies. So these are two of the major critical sectors where there are opportunities. On the other hand, we have issues in terms of foreign ownership as a result of the setup of our provisional guidelines that we have right now in the Constitution, which are still being carried and followed up. And then, of course, the organization should avoid high visibility acquisition, that is taking over or buying an existing company already for the purposes of establishing their brand or in the new country. And then of course, the next one is that we utilize the host country financing available options. So if there are funding already available in that country, don't bring in any funding that will be coming from your home country. And then accelerate profit repatriation. So we of course we want for this case we wanted to make sure and ensure that initial investments are recovered before deciding on how to reallocate additional investments to expand the business set up in the particular country. And then, as I mentioned, we should be able to source and offer strategic local partners in terms of distribution, availability of raw materials, and other business sections of the business operations, which we can actually use or tap the local resources instead of bringing our own resources. And then work with government agencies that direct dealing with the industry that we are present in. So that will give us an idea how we can avoid the different issues or minimize the impact of the risks that are available for our organization. And then with political support both in home and host nation. So this takes time, of course. And then of course monitor political and economic development. So for us to understand exactly how we would further manage the different political risks, we should be able to define exactly different issues about the legal system. So we have already mentioned what it can do, but we also need to understand that there are certain things on how certain nations implement their legal systems. So of course we do have issues about common law. These are things which are being decided about as a reason of tradition, customs, and precedents. So precedents, there are already previous situations where there were settling already performed as a result of customs and traditions. So when we talk about customs and traditions, this has been handed over from generation to generation, that been practiced and believed, which are generally related to the cultural environment of a country. So, and most often than not, when we talk about common laws, it is not necessarily a written law. Okay. Now, civil law, on the other hand, a written law, and it is usually being interpreted only with little flexibility by the different courts available on certain countries. So it is best important for multinational enterprise to understand exactly what laws that may be working for their advantage or their disadvantage as a result if they decide to actually operate in a new location. Now, since we have mentioned some countries more or less on a theocratic totalitarianism, the theocratic law is about discussing about the intermingling of religious practices with the legal system. Now, it's very common among Islamic countries. So in the Philippines, we have some, specifically in Mindanao, we have the so-called Sharia courts, which actually manages the affairs or the legal system in relation to certain provisions, which is uniquely among our Islamic brothers from the South. So those are the major concern if you're talking about the general legal environment. If you want to talk about the specific legal environment you wanted to manage, we need to understand on how contracts are being handled, considering the variety of differences from one country to another. Now, that's why the reason why the United Nations Convention on Contracts for International Sale of Goods, which is the CISC, was established to ensure that there will be a consistency of application regardless of which countries are involved in terms of trading relationships. So these are some of the issues within the political risk that should be understood and managed by all organizations. Now, what are the different legal considerations for multinational enterprises? We have already mentioned at the start, it's about the issue of legal jurisdiction, who will be the one performing the decision making in this case, the national and regional jurisdiction depending on the setup of the government. So in case of the United States, you talk about the state Supreme Court versus the federal Supreme Court. So in case of the Philippines, you only have the regional trial courts, then you move on to the Court of Appeals, then you do have the Supreme Courts. Okay, and what are the normal legal issues of interest of the multinational enterprises? Okay, now, so we have mentioned already some of the important issues about the laws earlier. So in relation to that, so let's now focus what are the major concerns of recognized brands, international companies coming in about their products. So it's about an issue on property rights and corruption. So it's about basically a violation of, we have issues on violation of property rights. So this can be either theft, privacy, blackmail, and others that may be about in terms of available in a particular country. So of course, we wanted to be protected in terms of the branding, the system. Okay, the products that we actually have. You're not going to a country just to be able to have somebody else capitalize on your situation. So that's the reason why it's very, very important that they are aware on how serious is the legal system of the country in penalizing people who are actually imitating or copying your brands. Now, I think everyone is familiar that considering the vast majority of the Filipinos could not necessarily afford the more famous brands that we have available. Aside from that, one of the cultural factors that we have learned, and you might have probably been aware of, is that there's a very high level of colonial mentality among the Filipinos. So we have a tendency to actually patronize and buy most of these foreign brands. But since we have concern on actually buying the original one, we would just settle probably with, well, there will be some people who will be settling about the imitation, or in this case, the pirated copies of the brand. So there are certain concerns in terms of intellectual properties, in reasons with the different products. So we talk about patents when we discuss about an invention or manufacturing. So there are licensed patents if you want to produce this here in the Philippines and distribute it. So but you have to get it from, of course, from the owner of the brand. So that's one issue and concerns. And of course, we have issues of copyright. Where authors, artists, playwrights, publishers, and composers are protected from anyone just stealing the music, or piracy are available there. So everyone is using already online system, downloading their favorite music without even getting approval or permission of the previous owners. So one of the major concern there is that so what happens to the music that we listen on the radio, to the music that we listen inside the malls? So that's the reason why sometimes you see some stickers which are posted that they are member of PhilSCAP, or they are subscribing with PhilSCAP, which is about the protection that they can actually play any song provided that they pay regular royalties as a result of using unlimited number of songs and being played on particular malls or restaurants, in this case in the radio stations. Okay, so even naman guys, it's a different situation if we talk about you have a composer who brings the music in a radio station so that it will be played so people will know it. That's a different situation because it's already the composer is giving the authority there. But if moving forward, the music has already been airing for quite some time. It's already a popular song, so royalty will now be an issue there. If a movie wants to use it, they have to ask for permission. So for the videos, you will hear some music that we are using. We are using the general license approved music. So in YouTube, there are certain composers who produce sounds which can use for YouTube videos. All you need to do sometimes is just to request for them to download this music, or the other things is that you will have to just become a member of their Patreon sites so that you can download as many songs as they are producing, and these are license guaranteed. Now, in terms of the pictures that we use for our presentations, now if you use licensed Microsoft, they would own, and then you can check that or tick the checkbox selecting that only with those pictures which has a general provision license that anyone can use it. So you can actually use that one. So that's the reason why sometimes you have limited selection to scout if you are using it. Now, this only happen, guys, if you search picture inside your application, whether it's a PowerPoint, it's a Word, okay, and you're inserting a picture. But if you are searching pictures in Google, okay, you did not check the selection for license-free pictures, well, you may be able to get pictures which have restrictions. In case that happens and they're not strict, what like we always say, we just go over the APA guidelines for presentation, for essay writing, for thesis writing, etc. So there are several guidelines in terms of educational system, in terms of how we will use this particular picture, this particular issues on that we actually have. Okay, and then of course we do have the aside from patent, copyright, we do have the trademark. This is about the design and the names of the brand. No, when we see the letter TM together with the logo, so it means it is a trademark logo of a particular brand. So for some countries had already started in our region, which is the Asian region, they have already started addressing concerns of international brands who are being copyrighted. First, in an issue of the equivalent of the language of the particular country. Second, it's about having the similarity in terms of the logos or design of the logos or the names itself. No? So trademark generally is being protected. Now, I think in the Philippines, one of the most classical case against trademark is the issue of Shangri-La. As an international brand, and you do have Shangri-La as a restaurant here in the Philippines, so which is much older in operation compared to the Shangri-La group of hotels. So when Shangri-La came to the Philippines, so they know that they had already encountered a brand using that name. So we have to also recognize that Shangri-La is a very popular Chinese name. It's a utopian idealism location. So that's the reason why it's not a surprise that there are several Chinese businessmen who are using them, a Filipino Chinese businessman and a foreign Chinese organization. So in this case, when they came to the Philippines, they had requested that they wanted to buy out, but it seems that the brand doesn't want to. No? So it reached a point that the one who won is the restaurant, until such time that they had agreed that the brand, which is the hotel chain, would buy it from the restaurant at the price they wanted, and the restaurant will retain the use of the brand. No, but unfortunately, if I had seen on the news as a result of this pandemic that this particular local restaurant have forced to close down, no, because of what has happened in the particular issues in terms of the pandemic. So they are not anymore operating as of today. Okay. And then of course we do have issue on product liability laws, issues on competition. So how many products or brands can actually compete in a particular location? So we wanted to know if there is a legislative provision for monopolization, or if the market's already open for competition for foreign brands or foreign entities or local entities. So when we call about the regulating industries, we are allowing foreign brands to come into the Philippines to compete with the local industry. So we have the first one that they regulated during the time of former President Fidel Ramos is the first one of the industry that was deregulated, of course, is the telecoms, and then of course the banking industry. Okay, so these are some industries wherein it was deregulated and allowed foreign establishments were allowed to enter into the Philippine market. Okay, and then which pave way for the entering of these brands. But we also need to understand that in the normal course of operation, we will also be talking about the the issues of economies of scale. So some organization eventually merge on, and that will be a different scenario already, which may or may not be necessarily related to the legal environment that we actually have in the Philippines. No? And then of course the product liability laws. No? How protected are the people in terms of product safety and product liability provisions? When we talk about product safety, what standards are being set by the host country in terms of what type of in terms of products that can be distributed and sold within an area, or even for services, how are they supposed to be sold, or offered? And then we talk about product liabilities, if in case these products or company that offers these services had violated, what are the guarantees that the consumer will be protected? So these are some of the issues on product liability laws. So there are several options, several concerns that may vary, that may affect the decision of the multinational enterprise on how they wanted to actually enter the market. So as a result of these factors, they may now be able to prioritize exactly what type of strategy they will use to enter in to the Philippine market. Okay, so what are the importance of compliance in the business world? So first, we need to understand, of course, that to enable other businesses to trust dealing with you, if you are complying with business practices that are acceptable in the host country, so you'll be able to have repeat customers and businesses, not only with other multinational organization but also with the local organization. That's very, very important. You follow the law, you contribute to the economy in terms of the movement of the payment of the taxes, or trying to fulfill its duties in terms of its legal system, in terms of the hiring of the people and how they are properly compensated. So it's technically a win-win situation. If the impression of the people for this organization is good, there will be a continuous demand for their products. Well, unless of course they're the only one offering that product in the country, and of course that will also ensure that government would not interfere in terms of the correct compliance of these businesses. There will not be takeover of certain businesses as such. So that's the reason why there's a compliance within, of course, the legal system and the law of a particular country. Okay. Now, to cite an example about compliance concern, I think one of the most famous popular concern within the recent type is the reason in terms of the law, which allows two different organizations to handle the distribution of water within Metro Manila. So there were observations by the national government that in the provision of the law, it's a lose-win situation wherein the one winning is the organization managing the franchise distribution, and the government is practically losing some options as a result of the particular law which was being implemented. So there might be a need to review and change it, but nonetheless, for as long as these private sectors who are managing the public services are complying, okay, as to the provisions of the law, you cannot penalize them because they are following the guidelines, and in terms of compliance, they are complying with what is the provision of the law. But we always say that in the legal system, there would always be several parties that may provide interpretation of such. So in civil law, it is actually the courts who should have the final say in terms of the fixed interpretation of this provision. So there might be several people interpreting it, but nonetheless, who will be interpreting this one is, in this case, would be the major courts of the country. In this case, which is the highest courts of which is the Supreme Court. So and then of course the compliance reflects also the extent of contribution in terms of possible productivity, not only for the people but also for its contribution to the government coffers. And then also it reflects exactly on how they can increase their possible business opportunities as a result of enjoying a great level of productivity within the country. This will end our session right now about the political and legal environment of business. And I'd like to thank everyone for watching this particular video, and hope that you will be able to like and share this one to your classmates and learn more about it. For if you have some concerns and you wanted to know more about, you can just message and place your concerns or comments within the message board below. Thank you for watching.